Hello everyone. I'm really delighted to be here and share with you some experiences I've had with FHIR, which is really revolutionizing healthcare informatics and leading to a whole new wave of innovative applications. My only regret is not to share this material with you in person. Hopefully next year that'll be the case. My name is Patrick Jameson. I'm the product manager for Iris for Health, and I've been working for the last few years exclusively on interoperability in FHIR. So here is my brief agenda this morning. I'd like to cover with you some of the topics around FHIR Search and the concepts related to FHIR Search, review with you the query options using FHIR, and give you a demo with a tool that I built that I think will make your life easier for doing FHIR Search. At the end of this, I think you're going to have an improved understanding of FHIR Search, confidence in using the query options and the tools we have, and you'll have free access to a FHIR Search tool that I think will make your lives easier. So what is FHIR? There's a lot of people who are new to this. It stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, and it's very different than its predecessor, HL7v2, which was created about 45 years ago. Some of the benefits of FHIR is that it's an open API with better semantic interoperability. Unlike HL7v2, it's largely query-driven, so it's great for using with, for example, building a mobile application. It uses modern REST interfaces that return JSON and XML. It's very secure using HTTP and HTTPS. And a good feature of it is that it can be deployed both on premises and in the cloud. And InterSystems FHIR Server gives you a number of deployment options. Now, the base unit in FHIR is what is called the resource. It's the smallest unit of transaction that's meaningful in healthcare. And you query it through a REST API, giving it an identifier. What it returns back to you is a very defined behavior and semantics for each of the resources, roughly 134 defined in the FHIR specification. It's a logically discrete unit of exchange. Here's an example of one such FHIR resource. It's only a partial definition, but you could see there are many different fields, including things like the identifier, whether the patient's record is active, the human name, etc. Some of these properties are not simple data types. They can be objects in and of themselves, and that's important to keep in mind. Another thing that you should keep in mind is that a FHIR resource can reference other FHIR resources. So in this example, the diagnostic report can reference the patient resource, the practitioner resource, or the observation resource. FHIR is organized around the concept of a server and a repository. There's a discrete endpoint for the service. This is the server that makes the information available. You must specify the resource type for doing a query, and you give it an ID typically that identifies that resource. So putting it all together, you could see on the screen we have the endpoint for our FHIR server, the resource type, the patient, and then the identifier. Now, I've talked a little bit about resources and how they could refer to other resources. It's important for you to understand that resources are completely context-free. They stand alone. They're self-contained. However, within a resource, you could have a number of data types, some of them very complex. While they contain a great deal of information, you can't query them outside of the resource itself. They don't have, in essence, a separate path to being queried. So that's very important to keep in mind, and you could do this basically through different search parameters that I'll be showing you. Our FHIR server is able to return and use all the standard interactions for a FHIR server. We include base, R4 support, and encompass all the interactions that you would expect, such as create, read, vread, etc. Now, when querying a FHIR server, some people get this confused. You can't just query any given field within the FHIR resource. You need to go to the HL7 page that talks about that resource, and it'll specify the exact parameters that can be queried with that resource. So for example, the patient resource, you could query for the address city, the birth date, etc. of the patient. To get the most out of your FHIR server, you should be aware of search prefixes. They allow you to make very flexible queries. For example, if I'm trying to query for an appointment resource, I could specify the date, and I could say, hey, I want dates greater than this date and less than another. So those prefixes come very handy to returning exactly those resources that you want. There are a number of advanced functions as well for returning resources. That includes sorting, counting, and summarizing these resources. Another advanced feature of querying is called include and rev-include. This is very similar to a SQL join query. What this does is returns not only the resource, but related resources. And you'll see examples in the demo that I will be performing in the next few minutes. Well, FHIR, it can be very confusing at first. For new developers, we've created an API that you can use through the development portal. It uses the Open API specification. It's a completely GUI way to accessing FHIR, so it'll help you get started in understanding how to do FHIR search. As you get more advanced, you'll want to take a look at the query search tool I've built that will allow you to do much more flexible and very sophisticated queries. So what are the key takeaways? I want you to understand FHIR is leading the way, and this is an important standard that you need to master. In mastering it, FHIR Search is key to getting the data from the FHIR server for building those great new innovative applications. So I would encourage you to get the FHIR Search tool, play with it. If you have questions, you could write to me, but most of all, have fun. I think you're going to find FHIR is very fun. So I thank you, and I'm going to give you a few tips at the end here. I fired up my query building tool. This was constructed by me in Angular, and it'll be posted in the Open Exchange. So you can use it for developing your own queries, or if you're really imaginative, you could probably extend it and make this a much better application. On the query page, you'll see 3 fields. The base path, now this is the endpoint to your FHIR server. And in my case, I'm using our API manager at port 8000, and the path is R4. If I want to query and do a very basic query, like let's say patient number 6, I could select that, and then I'm going to just submit this. And you'll see we'll get back a response body that has all the information about patient number 6. And you could see that there's a lot of embedded information. So the identifier, for example, there's 4 identifiers here. including things like the passport number. So this is really a very basic query that you could develop. Now, that's probably not what you're going to be developing. You're going to probably want to do something that queries one or more of the fields in that patient resource. So let's say we take the address city. We'll just click on it. And there are about 1,000 patients in the system. I'm going to just find those patients that are living in the city of Woburn, Massachusetts. We'll go ahead and submit that. And we'll see, we'll get back a bundle, which means that we have more than one FHIR resource. And we have basically 3 entries in this, including the full resource for each one of these. I'm not going to go through it right now, but you can see it's fairly easy to get that back. So notice the query, you have one of these search fields that are programmed into the system to make it easy to find. And we could then also, let's say we wanted to, we could do some modifiers of this field. So let's say we did a exact, as we've talked about. Now we're going to look exactly for those patients that live in Woburn. And if we go ahead and submit that, you're going to see a different response. Notice we get back a total of 0. And you're going to say, well, why is that? Well, you got back 3 before. Well, this is because Woburn is a city that begins with a capital W. And based on exact, we're talking about not only the same letters, but the same casing. Now notice what happens if I just say, oh, I don't want exact, I just want contains. So I'm just going to look for all those patients that begin in WO. So if I go ahead and submit that now, we will get back some responses. In this case, we get back 26 responses. And we could see that this will include Woburn and a number of other cities as well. And we could take a look at that address, and we could see Worcester is also included in there. So it's very simple then to do queries with exact or contains. Notice the syntax, so we have the field, a colon, and then the modifier. Okay, so this gives you kind of an example. Let's do some additional queries on the patient. And let's say we were looking at patients that had died at a particular date. So I'm going to type in, well, let's say 2014-01-01. Now, it's probable that we don't have anybody that died directly on that date, but let's just check it out just in case. And let's see, no, nobody died on that date. Okay, but we could do a prefix query. This would be easy to do. Now, how about we find patients that died on that date or any other date later than that date? So notice we hit GT here, and now we've put that prefix right before the date value. And in this case, we get back a total of 39 patients. Similarly, we could look for less than or equal to, and you'd see we get these. We're going to get, I'm sure, a number of patients back. In this case, we get 155 patients back. So very easy to do these kind of queries. Now, let's say you're saying to yourself, but I would be interested just in understanding which, whether it was just women or men. So let's add the gender in here, and let's put that we want really only males that died before 2014-01-01. So we'll do that and take a look. So we have 121 of those. instead of the 150 plus we had. So see, you could easily concatenate queries. You could then prefix the ones that are either dates or numbers, and you could then continue to add these very easily. Additionally, these are the most common search parameters. If you hit the button Show More, we could look at all the different fields that you could search for. For those that aren't selected in the list, you could easily find the search parameters on the FHIR website. So let's see how we can do some queries that are equivalent to joins in a typical SQL system. I'll start out by, again, specifying our base path. And now I'm going to try to join the encounter resource through the use of an include query. I'm going to select encounter number 15. So I'll specify that here. And now, in terms of doing the join, I want to include that with other resources. So which resource do I want to take or include? I want to include the patient resource. So I'll just replace that here. Let's go ahead and submit this. And if we look at the resources that are sent back, we'll see that there's going to be two entries. The first entry is for the encounter. And we can then, scroll through this resource and see all the different aspects to the encounter. Notice we have a reference to patient number 6. And that's exactly the resource that we asked to be included or joined to this. So if we look at the second resource that was sent back in this bundle, we see it's patient 6. We could expand that and then get all the information for that patient. Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward. Let's try now a more confusing query, I'd say. It's a type of a join again, but this time we're going to do what's called a reverse include. So we're going to take that patient with ID number 6. And I'll get rid of this here. And now we're going to do a reverse include. And what do we want to include for this patient? Well, we would like to get all the observations for patient ID 6. So I'll select it here. And in most cases, the resources that are connected or referenced by the resource are going to automatically pop up in this tool. I'm still building it out, so as we saw for the encounter resource, we didn't see that come up. But now I'm going to go ahead and submit this, and we could see then all the resources that came back. Notice that there's quite a few observations, but if we look at the first portion of the bundle, we see the patient resource. And then all of these are going to be observations. So this is a little different than really a SQL join, but the idea is that we can include different resources, the primary resources being the patient, the secondary resources, all the observations that are linked to this patient. So this kind of gives you a pretty good feel for the different kinds of queries you could do with FHIR. One other aspect of the tool, which I won't go into here, but I'll do it in the FHIR API management talk, is I have a history feature so that you can basically get back all those queries, rerun them, and edit them if you want. So if we wanted to enter this counter query, we could just bring that back, and then we could add additional parameters to it. I want to share with you just a couple other items before I leave. There's some next steps that you might want to consider. There are some interesting sessions on FHIR, in fact, a whole track, so you could be sure to check out FHIR API management and working with FHIR profiles in Iris for Health. We also have a number of courses that you want to consider for learning more about FHIR. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and connect with me, Pat Jameson, or my colleague Craig Lee. He's an expert on FHIR. So I thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful virtual summit.